Winter didn't just arrive in Harlem in 1952. It took over. The wind sliced through coats, rattled windows, and turned every breath on 125th Street into smoke. Harlem was cold, loud, and restless. But high above it all, in a Sugar Hill apartment overlooking the neighborhood he ruled, Bumpy Johnson stood at a window, feeling something he wasn't used to feeling at all: fear. Not fear of rival gangs, not fear of the police, fear for someone much smaller, someone who couldn't speak, his baby daughter. On the streets, Bumpy Johnson's name carried weight. Men lowered their voices when he walked by. Deals were honored because he said so. He had survived wars with ruthless mobsters and years of government pressure. Harlem knew him as iron. But inside his home, that iron melted every time he looked at his child sleeping in her crib. She wasn't just his daughter. She was his second chance. Proof that his life could create something good. That's why he hired the best. A nanny with perfect references. A professional woman trusted by powerful people. In a time when image meant everything, hiring her felt like protection, like doing things the right way. And on the surface, she was flawless. Clean uniform, calm voice, strict schedule. Neighbors admired her. Doctors agreed with her. Even Bumpy's own instincts told him to stay quiet. But something felt wrong. The baby started crying differently. Not fussy, not tired, terrified. The kind of crying that cuts through walls and settles deep in your chest. She stopped reaching for Bumpy. She flinched when she heard footsteps. Sometimes her hair was damp when it shouldn't have been. Sometimes she stared at the door like she was waiting for something bad to happen. The nanny always had an answer. Colic. Sensitive child. Too much attention. And when doctors found nothing wrong, the explanation started to sound reasonable. Still, Bumpy couldn't shake the feeling. This was a man who made a living reading people. He could hear a lie before it finished leaving someone's mouth. And when he looked at the nanny, at how calm she was, how controlled, he saw something else underneath. Something tight, something cold. A woman who didn't like noise. A woman who didn't like weakness. Then one afternoon, Bumpy came home early. What he heard through a closed door made his blood turn to ice. Not crying, panic. Not soothing words, anger. Not care. Something else entirely. Something quiet. Something hidden. Something that left no marks and no bruises. Something that would explain everything. In that moment, Bumpy Johnson realized the danger wasn't on the streets of Harlem. It was inside his own home. And if he was right, firing her wouldn't be enough. Because whatever was happening to his baby, someone was going to wish it had stopped at that. Bumpy didn't rush the door. That was the strange part. Every instinct in him screamed to act, to tear the truth out of the situation the way he had done 100 times on the streets. But this wasn't a rival or a snitch. This was his home, his child. One wrong move, one accusation without proof, and the whole thing could turn against him. In Harlem, rumors traveled faster than bullets, and a man like Bumpy Johnson never got the benefit of the doubt. So he watched. Over the next few days, Bumpy started coming home early, unannounced. He stayed quiet, listened more than he spoke. In the mornings, everything looked normal. The nanny smiled. The baby was calm. Neighbors waved as they passed a stroller on Edgecombe Avenue. Anyone looking in would have said Bumpy Johnson finally had a peaceful family life. But every afternoon, like clockwork, the mood shifted. The baby's crying always started around the same time. Not the soft kind, not the hungry kind. This was sharp, desperate, panicked. The kind of sound that made Bumpy's chest tighten. When he walked into the nursery during those moments, the crying would suddenly stop. The nanny would straighten up, smooth her uniform, and explain it away. Some babies just have difficult temperaments, she'd say. You shouldn't interfere. It makes it worse. Bumpy noticed things other people didn't. The way the nanny stood between him and the crib. The way the baby's eyes followed her every move. The way the room always felt colder when the door was closed. He noticed the baby clinging harder to him, like she was afraid he might leave again. He brought it up to his wife carefully. He didn't want to scare her. He didn't want to sound paranoid. She listened, but the nanny had credentials. Doctors saw no signs of harm. Friends said Bumpy was just being overprotective. And maybe For a moment, he wondered if they were right. Maybe this was just stress. Maybe the life he lived had finally followed him home. But then came the voice. One afternoon, Bumpy stood in the hallway outside the nursery, unseen. The door was shut, the baby was crying, and through the wood, he heard the nanny speaking. Not the calm, gentle tone she used in front of others, but something sharp, angry, almost hateful. The words were low, but the feeling behind them was unmistakable. Bumpy felt it in his gut. That was when he understood something important. Whatever was happening in that room wasn't accidental. It wasn't illness, and it wasn't normal. It was something being done on purpose, behind closed doors, counting on silence and trust to survive. The problem was proof. Bumpy Johnson knew how the world worked. If he accused her and was wrong, he looked like exactly what his enemies wanted to look like, a violent gangster terrorizing a woman who was just doing her job. And if he was right, acting without evidence could still cost him everything. His home, his freedom, his child. So he made a decision that only a man like him could make. He would stop guessing. He would stop trusting appearances.
I know what you did.
And he would find out exactly what was happening when that
Don't lie to me!
nursery
I'm
door
not, I
closed.
swear!
Because if someone was hurting his child in the dark, they weren't going to get away with it quietly. Bumpy started changing his routine without telling anyone. He canceled meetings, skipped dinners, and stayed close to home more than Harlem had ever seen him do before. People noticed. When Bumpy Johnson disappeared from the streets, it meant something was coming. But this time, the danger wasn't outside. It was already under his roof. He watched the nanny from a distance, the way he once watched men he didn't trust. He paid attention to small things. How she avoided eye contact when the baby cried too long. How she locked the nursery door for quiet. How she became tense whenever Bumpy's name was mentioned. To everyone else, she looked like a hard-working caregiver dealing with a powerful man's household. To Bumpy, she looked like someone hiding something. The neighbors offered another angle. One woman mentioned seeing the nanny arguing with someone near the back alley late one evening. Another said the stroller sometimes stayed parked in the shade far longer than necessary. Even on cold days, nothing solid, just fragments. But Bumpy knew fragments were how big truths began. At night, when the house was quiet, Bumpy sat awake replaying everything. He thought about his enemies, about how often people had tried to get to him through the ones he loved. Harlem had taught him that you never attack the king directly if you could poison his future instead. The thought made his jaw tighten. His wife began to sense the shift. She asked why he looked so tired, why he never left the house anymore. Bumpy wanted to tell her everything, but fear held him back. Fear that if he spoke too soon, the nanny would sense it and disappear. Fear that the truth might be worse than suspicion. The nanny, meanwhile, grew bolder. She insisted on longer hours alone with the baby. She complained about being watched. She hinted that powerful men often imagined threats that weren't real. Her words were careful, almost rehearsed, as if she knew exactly how to sound innocent. One afternoon, Bumpy noticed the baby flinch at the sound of the nanny's footsteps. It was subtle, almost invisible, but to father it screamed. That moment burned itself into his memory. This wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about trust being broken in silence. Bumpy reached out quietly to someone he trusted, a man who owed him a favor and knew how to observe without being seen. No threats, no confrontations, just eyes and patience. Because whatever was happening needed to be exposed cleanly, without chaos. Still, doubt followed him. What if he was wrong? What if this was just fear twisting his judgment? Harlem had taught him to trust his instincts, but this was different. This was his child, his legacy. And while Bumpy watched, waited, and planned, the nanny smiled like nothing was wrong, unaware that the walls around her were slowly closing in. The man Bumpy trusted didn't ask questions. He never did. He simply blended into the background of the neighborhood. Another face in Harlem that no one bothered to look twice at. From the outside, nothing changed. The nanny still took the baby out each morning. She still smiled at neighbors and exchanged polite words with shopkeepers. Life moved on, just as she expected it to. But now, every step she took was being quietly noted. From another angle, the household felt heavier. Bumpy's wife tried to keep things normal, but tension leaked into every room. She started double-checking doors, staying closer to the nursery, watching the nanny with a careful politeness. She didn't accuse. She didn't confront. But the trust she once had was fading, and the nanny felt it. Her tone sharpened. Her patience grew thin. The baby, caught in the middle, became restless. Sleep came in short bursts. Sudden cries echoed to the house at night, cutting through the silence like alarms. Each time, the nanny insisted she handle it alone. Each time, Bumpy felt that same tight feeling in his chest, the one that told him something wasn't right. Out on the streets, whispers started forming. Some said Bumpy Johnson was losing his edge. Others said he was planning something big. No one imagined the truth, that the most dangerous situation he'd ever faced wasn't a rival boss or a crooked cop, but a quiet figure inside his own home. The observer noticed patterns. Certain afternoons when the nanny took longer routes. Short stops that didn't make sense. Moments when she thought no one was watching and her calm mask slipped. Nothing illegal, nothing obvious, just behavior that raised questions. And in Harlem, unanswered questions were never harmless. One evening, Bumpy overheard the nanny on the phone, her voice low and rushed. She stopped speaking the moment she noticed him nearby, forcing a laugh and claiming it was a personal call. Bumpy nodded and walked away, but his mind stayed sharp. She wasn't just hiding something, she was waiting for something. That night, Bumpy sat beside his child's crib long after the lights were out. He watched the small rise and fall of the baby's chest and felt the weight of every decision he'd ever made. Power had protected him for years. Money had solved problems, but neither could guarantee safety now. He knew time was running out. Either the truth would surface on its own, or he would have to push harder and risk everything. The nanny continued her routine, confident and composed, never realizing that her freedom depended on secrets she could no longer control. That same night, as Bumpy sat quietly in the dim glow of the nursery lamp, his phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize flashed on the screen. Hesitation tugged at him, but instinct took over. He answered. A distorted voice whispered a single sentence. "She isn't working alone." The words hit harder than he expected. His mind raced. Could it be someone trying to manipulate him? Or worse, was this the truth? Bumpy had dealt with betrayal before, but never like this. Never inside his own home. Never involving his child. The next morning, the nanny arrived with her usual calm demeanor. She smiled at the baby, cooed softly, and carried herself as if nothing had changed. But Bumpy noticed subtle differences. Her movements were sharper. Her eyes flickered nervously when they met his. He began following her in the house under the guise of mundane tasks. Every drawer opened, every cabinet checked. Every small interaction became a puzzle piece in his growing suspicion. Then came the second twist. While reviewing the nanny's bag during a brief moment alone, Bumpy found a crumpled receipt for a local electronics store. Something that seemed harmless at first glance. But when he checked the date and items purchased, the pieces didn't add up. A baby monitor, yes, but also a small camera and an unmarked USB drive. Suddenly, a chilling thought gripped him. Someone could be watching them. Someone could be recording. He didn't confront her immediately. Bumpy had always been patient. He knew the value of waiting, letting people reveal their own hands. But the tension in the house thickened. His wife noticed him lingering near doors, checking windows, double-checking locks. She asked questions, but Bumpy brushed him off, insisting it was just paranoia. Inside, though, he was calculating. Every decision, every move, was now under the shadow of a larger, unseen threat. Outside the home, another layer of suspense was forming. A neighbor, who had always seemed overly curious, was spotted lingering near the property at odd hours. Notes of her movements were being quietly passed to Bumpy through his trusted ally in the neighborhood.
I had
nothing concrete yet.
Why now?
But patterns
After
emerged.
everything?
Because I couldn't
Coincidences
stay away.
that seemed too precise, moments that suggested a larger plan was unfolding. Bumpy's thoughts returned to the baby. Every smile, every innocent giggle, now carried a heavy weight. He imagined the worst-case scenarios and knew he couldn't let this go unchecked. Yet, he also couldn't act rashly. One wrong move and everything, including his family, could spiral out of control. That evening, he decided to set a subtle trap. The nanny would think she was continuing her usual routine, but Bumpy had other plans. Hidden cameras installed in places she wouldn't expect, careful observation of her phone activity, and quiet surveillance of everyone who even had a hint of connection to her. The stakes were higher than ever, and just when Bumpy felt the tension reaching a breaking point, he received another message, a single photo showing someone very close to him, someone he trusted completely, standing near the baby's crib. The note attached said only, "Trust no one." The words echoed in his mind. Whoever was orchestrating this was bold, careful, and dangerous. And now, the conflict had escalated beyond suspicion. Bumpy realized he was no longer just protecting his home. He was racing against a hidden enemy who had already started moving their pieces. The night ended with silence in the house, but Bumpy couldn't sleep. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Every sound became a potential warning. And deep down, he knew one thing. The next move could change everything. The night was heavy, almost suffocating, as Bumpy paced the living room. Every creak of the floor, every whisper wind outside felt like a signal. He'd spent days gathering evidence, following every lead and watching every move of the nanny. Everything pointed to betrayal. But now, he needed confirmation. He couldn't act on suspicion alone. As the clock struck midnight, Bumpy noticed movement in the hallway. The nanny appeared, quietly tiptoeing toward the baby's room. He didn't make a sound, letting her think she was unseen. Her actions were careful, precise, almost rehearsed. She opened a small drawer, reached for the baby monitor, and whispered into a device, assuming it was safe. Bumpy stepped forward, his voice low but sharp. "That's enough." The nanny froze.
You have to tell me what's
guilt
wrong.
and fear flashing
I can't.
across
It
her
would change
face.
everything.
She tried
Please,
to speak,
I need to know.
but
I'm pregnant.
Bumpy raised a hand. "I saw everything. The receipts, the cameras, the USB. You weren't working alone, were you?" Tears welled in her eyes as she admitted it. She had been coerced by someone outside the family, someone who wanted information about Bumpy's life and routines. But the confession didn't end there. She revealed the name of the mastermind, someone Bumpy trusted deeply, someone who had access to the house and the family's private life. Heart pounding, Bumpy processed a betrayal. The second twist hit harder than the first. It was not a stranger, not a random neighbor, but his own longtime friend, someone he considered family. The realization stung worse than any physical blow. Everything had been orchestrated. The camera, the baby monitor, the suspicious messages, all designed to manipulate him, to break him from within. With precise calm, Bumpy disarmed the situation. He kept the nanny close, making sure she was safe but firmly under watch. Then, using the evidence she had unwittingly provided, he confronted the traitor. The confrontation was tense, almost cinematic, words thrown like daggers, accusations sharp, and the air thick with fear and anger. The betrayal cut deep, but Bumpy's focus was on protection, not revenge. He ensured the baby was never at risk again, and that every hidden camera or device was destroyed. The house, once filled with tension and uncertainty, began to feel secure again. The immediate danger was over, but the emotional impact lingered. Bumpy sat with his family, watching the baby sleep peacefully, a silent vow forming in his mind. He would never let anyone threaten this family again. Just when it seemed the story had reached its end, a subtle alert on Bumpy's phone caught his eye. A message from an unknown number. A single sentence that sent a chill down his spine. "You solved the first part. Are you ready for the next?" Bumpy's eyes narrowed. Despite resolving the betrayal, the real danger wasn't over. Someone out there was still moving their pieces, still watching, still planning. The sense of relief was tempered by a new, unsettling awareness. This was only the beginning of a larger game. He looked at his family, his resolve hardening. The house was safer now, the immediate threat neutralized, but Bumpy knew one thing for certain. Trust would never be simple again, and the shadows hiding in plain sight were far from gone. The night ended with quiet determination, but the final twist lingered in the air, leaving a question burning in every viewer's mind. Who was behind the next move, and what would they risk to succeed? The tension in the house slowly began to fade as the first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains. Bumpy sat quietly in the living room, The baby asleep in the crib nearby, reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also opened his eyes. He realized that trust was fragile, and in a world filled with hidden agendas, vigilance wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity. The nanny, though shaken, had proven to be honest once the truth came out. Bumpy decided to give her a second chance, but with strict boundaries. She would continue to care for the baby, but under a careful watch. It wasn't about punishment. It was about making sure everyone in the house felt safe again. He had learned that sometimes people could make mistakes under pressure, and forgiveness could coexist with caution. As the day went on, Bumpy started cleaning up the last traces of the invasion. Hidden cameras were removed, devices destroyed, and every corner of the house checked for security gaps. He even upgraded the locks and installed new alarms. But beyond the physical precautions, Bumpy focused on something more important: the emotional safety of his family. He spent hours simply being present, talking, listening, and reassuring his loved ones that they were protected. The twist with his longtime friend lingered in his mind. Bumpy knew he couldn't simply forgive such a betrayal, but he also understood the value of closure. He confronted his friend one final time, calmly but firmly, making it clear that trust had been broken beyond repair. There was no need for revenge, just boundaries and lessons learned. It was a hard truth, but necessary. The message was clear: loyalty mattered more than anything, and deceit had consequences. In the end, Bumpy's family came out stronger. The baby remained safe, the household secure, and a sense of unity replaced the fear that had hung in the air for days. Bumpy had faced danger, betrayal, and manipulation, but he had come through it with clarity and resolve. The experience had taught him, and anyone watching, the importance of vigilance, the complexity of trust, and the power of standing strong when life tests you. As evening settled, Bumpy looked out the window, the city lights casting a warm glow. He knew that challenges would come again. Life rarely left questions unanswered, but he also knew he had the strength and wisdom to face whatever lay ahead. The betrayal had ended, the immediate danger resolved, and the house was safe once more. For the audience, the story left a simple but powerful message. Even when trust is broken, careful observation, courage, and calm decision-making can protect what matters most. Bumpy Johnson had faced a test of loyalty, uncovered hidden threats, and safeguarded his family, showing that even in the darkest moments, clarity and strength could guide the way. The story ended not with fear, but with a quiet sense of triumph, and a reminder that vigilance and love could overcome even the deepest betrayals. And though the house was calm now, one thought lingered for everyone watching. In a world full of secrets, staying alert and protecting what you love is always the most important lesson. The story of betrayal, trust, and courage had reached its end, but the lessons would stay with the audience long after the screen went dark.